During the last years of the Second World War, strange things began to appear in the skies and on the seas, machines that didn't quite belong to the ordinary battlefield. They were sketches in engineers, notebooks, half-finished prototypes in underground tunnels, rumors whispered by captured pilots. Most were never seen again. Some were destroyed before they could be tested. Yet the few that survived left behind fragments of a different war. One fought in laboratories and hidden factories, while the rest of the world bled in the open. When historians speak of the conflict, they talk about tanks and bombers, the big battles, the generals. What remains largely unseen is the technological race that ran beneath it all, a race that pushed the limits of what the 1940s could build. Behind locked doors in Germany, Britain, Japan, the United States, and the Soviet Union, scientists tried to invent the weapon that might end the war, or win the next one before it even began. The records show that some of these projects succeeded briefly, others collapsed under their own ambition. But each left traces, blueprints, photographs, a line in an archive that hint at how far human imagination can go when survival is at stake. And it is from those traces that this story begins. In the winter of 1944, Allied reconnaissance aircraft returning from missions over western Germany reported something unusual. Their radar operators had begun to pick up faint, fast-moving blips that appeared and vanished without warning. The pilots called them ghost planes. The blips were too quick to be ordinary fighters and too small to be bombers. For weeks, intelligence officers dismissed the reports as equipment errors. Then one crew photographed a dark, delta-shaped object gliding through a break in the clouds. It had no propeller. Its wings curved like those of a bird. The image, once developed, caused confusion in London and Washington alike. What the reconnaissance crews had seen was real. The Horten Ho 229, the world's first operational jet-powered flying wing. Designed by brothers Riemar and Walter Horten, the aircraft was part of Germany's desperate attempt to regain control of its skies after years of Allied bombing. Its sleek, tailless form reduced drag and radar visibility in ways no other plane of the era achieved. Built from a mix of wood and steel, powered by two Junkers Jumo 4 turbojets, the Horten could reach speeds close to 600 miles per hour, nearly matching the fastest Allied fighters. Yet the aircraft was far more than a speed experiment. The brothers believed that by eliminating the traditional fuselage, they could create a plane that used less fuel, carried heavier loads, and though the word did not yet exist, might be invisible to radar. Their design would later inspire stealth technology decades after the war's end. Only 3 prototypes were completed before the factory was captured by American troops. One incomplete airframe was shipped to the United States for testing. The others were lost to history. Engineers who examined it at the time said that, had it been built in numbers, it could have changed the air war over Europe. The discovery raised a new question. If a jet-powered flying wing had reached prototype stage in 1944, what else had Germany or its rivals been building in secret? Allied intelligence began to collect reports of weapons that sounded implausible even by wartime standards. Rockets that could cross oceans, submarines that carried aircraft, bombs that guided themselves to targets. Many of those rumors turned out to be true. Among the files declassified after the war was one labeled simply Vergeltungswaffen 2, Retaliation Weapon 2. Its creators called it the A4, though the world would come to know it as the V2 rocket. Standing nearly 15 meters tall and powered by a liquid fuel engine, it was the first human-made object to reach the edge of space. Launched from mobile platforms in occupied Europe, it rose into the stratosphere before plunging toward London at almost 4,000 kilometers per hour. No pilot, no defense, just the sound of air tearing apart moments before impact. Each strike killed civilians rather than soldiers, but the psychological effect was enormous. The missile's creator, Wernher von Braun, once described it as a test vehicle for reaching the stars. History would later prove him right. The same man who built the V2 for Hitler would build the Saturn V for NASA. The V2 was not a rumor. It was a glimpse of the future hidden inside a weapon of revenge. But it was not the only secret project that blurred the line between experiment and madness. In Britain, the war's inventors pursued ideas that were both brilliant and almost absurd. One of them came from the mind of a naval engineer named Geoffrey Pike, who proposed building aircraft carriers not from steel but from ice. His reasoning was practical. Steel was scarce, but frozen water was everywhere. If reinforced with sawdust, the resulting material, called picrete, was strong enough to stop bullets and slow melting enough to survive weeks at sea. In 1942, the British Admiralty actually tested a small prototype on a lake in Alberta, Canada. It worked. Plans were drawn for a massive floating fortress code-named Habakkuk, designed to carry bombers across the Atlantic. Refrigeration systems would keep the hull frozen even in warm waters, and crews would live inside insulated tunnels carved into the ice. But as steel production increased and the project's logistical nightmares grew, the idea was quietly abandoned. The test model melted in the Canadian sun, leaving behind only photographs and a short report. Still, the concept remains one of the most audacious engineering proposals of the entire war. Each of these inventions, Germany's stealth jet, its supersonic rocket, Britain's ice carrier, was born from the same pressure: to outthink an enemy before being destroyed by him. The deeper the war went, the further each nation pushed into untested science. Japan pursued underwater aircraft carriers. The Soviets experimented with rocket interceptors. The Americans explored radar-guided bombs and the splitting of the atom itself. Behind every breakthrough lay a shadow, because no one knew what might happen once the machines were finally used. By 1945, secrecy had become a weapon of its own. Entire laboratories were moved underground, their entrances disguised as barns or quarries. Scientists signed documents they could never discuss again. And across Europe, rumors of a final wonder weapon, Wunderwaffe, spread faster than facts could catch up. Some of those rumors were pure propaganda, others were the first hints of technologies that would shape the modern world. By the spring of 1945, Japan's navy had been driven back to its own shores. Its cities burned, its fleet shattered, and yet the Imperial Command refused to yield. In hidden dry docks on the island of Honshu, engineers worked on what they believed could change the balance one last time: the I-400 class submarine. To ordinary eyes, it looked like a large undersea vessel, but inside its enormous cylindrical hangar lay a secret: three-folded aircraft built to take off once the sub surfaced. Each plane could carry an 800-pound bomb, fly more than 600 miles, and return to land on water beside the submarine to be hoisted back aboard. The plan was to strike the Panama Canal or the U.S. West Coast, crippling supply lines. When American forces captured two of these submarines after Japan's surrender, they were stunned. The I-400 measured 400 feet long, making it the largest submarine in the world until the 1960s. Its hangar doors were watertight. Its catapult could launch planes within minutes. In concept, it was a mobile airbase that could circle the globe unseen. U.S. intelligence dismantled the craft, photographed every mechanism, and sank the remainder at sea to prevent Soviet inspection. For decades, no one spoke of it. The idea, though, never died. It would quietly influence the design of missile submarines during the Cold War. While the Japanese worked beneath the waves, Germany pursued something even harder to explain. Deep in the Owl Mountains of Silesia, near a facility called Der Riese, the giant, construction crews and forced laborers dug vast concrete halls for a device whose purpose remains uncertain. After the war, Polish and German witnesses described a bell-shaped machine suspended between thick metal pylons, connected to heavy electrical cables. It emitted a pale violet light, they said, and anyone who approached it suffered burns or illness. The few surviving German documents call it Die Glocke, the bell. Historians disagree on what the bell actually was. Some believe it was an experimental centrifuge for testing new fuels. Others that it was part of early research into nuclear propulsion. What gives the story its longevity is the fact that so many records from that region were destroyed or hidden. Allied investigators found empty tunnels lined with ceramic tiles and mysterious mounts that could have held large rotating equipment. The scientists connected to the project vanished. Whether the bell was real or exaggerated, it became a symbol of how far the war's secrecy had gone. A machine that might have been technological genius or pure myth. Not all mystery weapons were so obscure. The Allies themselves engaged in projects that bordered on the unbelievable. In the United States, engineers at the Edgewood Arsenal experimented with chemical camouflage and with drones long before the word existed. In 1943, they produced the Aphrodite program, modifying obsolete bombers into remote-controlled flying bombs loaded with explosives. Pilots would take off manually, arm the charges, bail out by parachute, and ground operators would guide the empty plane toward a target using radio signals and television cameras. The idea worked only on paper. Signal interference and primitive guidance made control nearly impossible. Several missions ended in disaster, including one that killed Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., elder brother of the future U.S. president. Still, the program marked the first practical step toward the unmanned aerial weapons of the present day. Across the Atlantic, British research turned to defense rather than offense. To counter the V-2 and later jet attacks, scientists at the Telecommunications Research Establishment developed a radar system capable of tracking fast-moving objects through the upper atmosphere. Their experiments produced the earliest understanding of what would become guided missile detection and air defense networks. Yet among their more secret proposals was something stranger: the acoustic mirror. Huge concrete dishes, some 200 feet wide, were built along England's eastern coast to concentrate sound waves from incoming aircraft before radar matured. These eerie structures still stand today, monuments to a moment when engineers tried to listen to war before they could see it. At the same time, deep beneath the mountains of New Mexico, another Allied project pursued a secret of its own. Though the Manhattan Project is now well known, few outside military circles understood, even after Hiroshima, how uncertain its outcome had been. In 1944, multiple laboratories raced not only to split the atom but to weaponize radiation itself. Some early proposals suggested using small, dirty bombs to deny terrain. Others imagined propulsion systems driven by atomic heat. Most were abandoned once fission weapons succeeded. The files remained sealed for decades, reminding historians that the atomic bomb we remember was only one of several nuclear paths explored during the war. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the archives of the Third Reich contained hundreds of incomplete blueprints, sketches of flying, saucer-shaped aircraft, pressure-suit submarines, and beam weapons. Many were fantasies drawn by designers hoping for continued funding. Others, such as the radar-guided Wasserfall missile, were dangerously close to working reality. Allied scientists studying captured materials were astonished by how advanced some concepts were for their time. Jet interceptors, rocket-boosted aircraft, even vertical takeoff prototypes existed as physical models. The war had forced science to evolve by decades in only a few years. When the fighting ended, the weapons race did not. Under Operation Paperclip, American intelligence moved more than 1,500 German engineers, including Wernher von Braun and his V-2 team, to the United States. Their knowledge seeded NASA and the ballistic missile programs of the 1950s. The Soviet Union did the same, relocating captured scientists eastward. The secret war had merely changed its name. Yet not every project could be accounted for. In 1946, fishermen off the coast of Norway reported strange metallic wreckage washing ashore, pieces that looked like aircraft panels, but lighter than aluminum and unmarked by any known manufacturer. Some claimed they belonged to one of Germany's last prototypes, perhaps a flying wing or rocket glider launched too late to matter. Others suspected they were fragments of Allied experiments never officially recorded. The truth was never confirmed. The Cold War's new secrecy quickly buried such questions under layers of classification. What these stories share is not proof, but evidence of possibility. They remind us that even during humanity's darkest conflict, imagination kept working, restless and fearless. The weapons may have been designed for destruction, yet the science behind them, jet propulsion, rocketry, composite materials, became the foundation of our modern world. From those hidden laboratories came not only devastation but discovery. By 1945, the laboratories grew silent. The blueprints were sealed away, the prototypes dismantled, the tunnels flooded. For a time, it seemed the age of mystery weapons had ended. But the machines themselves, or the ideas that birthed them, had already escaped into history. They would reappear later under different names, in different wars on every side. In the first quiet months after victory, Allied intelligence teams combed through the wreckage of Europe searching for documents, machinery, and men. They called these missions T-forces, technical forces, tasked with finding anything that might reveal how far the enemy's science had advanced. What they found convinced many officers that the war's most dangerous front had not been on the battlefield at all. Crates of blueprints were taken from caves in Austria and tunnels in Czechoslovakia. Some showed sketches for ramjet fighters, others for radio-guided torpedoes, magnetic rockets, or sun guns designed to focus light from orbit. Most were impractical, some were breathtakingly forward-thinking. Each file raised the same uneasy thought. If war could push invention this far in 6 years, what might another 10 years bring? In one warehouse near Nordhausen, soldiers uncovered pieces of an aircraft no one recognized. A long, sleek fuselage without wings. It was labeled A9A10. Engineers identified it as a proposed 2-stage rocket capable of reaching the United States from Europe. The lower stage would lift the upper missile beyond the atmosphere, where it would glide across the Atlantic before diving onto its target. The design was decades ahead of its time. No nation would field a comparable intercontinental missile until the late 1950s. To the men examining it in 1945, it looked like science fiction rendered in steel. Other finds blurred the line between technology and rumor. In several occupied towns, locals described seeing circular aircraft tested at night, machines that rose vertically and glowed blue at the edges. Allied interrogators dismissed most of these stories as confusion or propaganda. Yet a few captured drawings from German archives depicted disc-shaped lifting bodies intended to test low-speed stability. None were proven to have flown, but the idea would feed post-war myths of Nazi flying saucers and spark speculation whenever unusual objects appeared in the skies of the early Cold War. Meanwhile, Japan's secret research had left its own puzzles. Among the captured documents in Tokyo were plans for the Kikka, the country's first jet aircraft, and proposals for fire balloons, paper hydrogen balloons carrying incendiary bombs on the jet stream toward North America. Around 300 of them actually reached the continent, starting small forest fires from Oregon to British Columbia. Few people at the time knew why the fires had begun. Only later did investigators trace them back to Japan's last desperate attempt to strike across an ocean. The search for hidden weapons extended beneath the sea. Allied divers exploring sunken U-boats found torpedoes equipped with primitive acoustic homing systems, devices that listened for propeller noise and steered toward it automatically. These Zonkernig torpedoes were the ancestors of modern smart munitions. They frightened Allied navies not because of what they had done, but because of what they implied. Warfare was learning to think for itself. When the captured scientists were questioned, most insisted they had been engineers, not soldiers. They spoke of solving equations, not fighting a war, yet their equations had rewritten combat. In underground offices in Washington and Moscow, new programs quietly began, each side racing to adapt the enemy's discoveries before the other could. The Cold War was seeded not by ideology alone, but by recovered technology, each fragment of German, Japanese, or Allied experimentation becoming a stepping stone toward missiles, supersonic aircraft, and nuclear submarines. Still, some questions never found answers. Reports surfaced of abandoned shafts in the Bavarian Alps containing strange, metallic alloys resistant to corrosion. American metallurgists who tested small samples noted properties similar to titanium, but the origin remained unclear. Theories multiplied. Fragments of jet airframes, parts of rocket fuselages, or experimental materials for flying wing bombers. Whatever their purpose, the alloys hinted that late-war research had reached materials science levels decades ahead of its age. Not all secrets were sinister. Among the files from the British Admiralty was a design titled Habakkuk II, a revision of the ice carrier idea using reinforced concrete rather than pickrete. It had been shelved in 1943, but kept on record, an example of how creative desperation had become. The engineers who read it in 1946 laughed, but many admitted privately that had the war lasted longer, someone might actually have built it. By the early 1950s, the world had moved on. The one-stop secret jets now appeared at air shows. Guided missiles were tested in deserts under open sky. Yet rumors persisted that deeper experiments had taken place, ones that official histories never mentioned. Farmers in central Germany told of tunnels sealed by dynamite after the surrender. Miners near Prague claimed to have seen giant rings of machinery buried in rock. None of these accounts were verified, but they gave post-war Europe a strange undercurrent of mystery, a sense that the conflict's ghosts were still alive beneath the soil. In 1957, a NATO technical report revisited many of the captured German and Japanese projects. It concluded that fewer than 10% had reached prototype stage, yet those few included technologies, jet propulsion, infrared guidance, synthetic fuels, that would dominate the next generation. The rest were labeled curiosities, brilliant but impractical. Still, even curiosities can inspire. When aviation historians traced the lineage of stealth design in the 1980s, they found the same name written in the margins. Horten, the flying wing, had returned, reborn as the B-2 Spirit bomber. For the investigators of 1945, these outcomes were impossible to imagine. They had walked through ruins, collecting pieces of a war too vast to comprehend. Yet the files they gathered would chart the course of modern technology. In that sense, the real mystery of World War II's secret weapons was not whether they existed. They did. But how completely they predicted the shape of the future. By the late 1940s, engineers in both superpowers were building from blueprints whose corners still bore German, British, or Japanese handwriting. Jet engines that had first screamed across the skies of Europe now powered the next generation of fighters. Rocket specialists who had once tested V-2s in the forests of Peenemünde stood in white coats at missile ranges in the New Mexico desert. The public believed the future had arrived overnight. Few realized how many of its roots lay in the laboratories of a defeated enemy. The Soviet Union moved quickly to replicate what it could not import. Captured V-2 components were trucked east to a new research center near Moscow, where teams led by Sergei Korolev and other veterans of the war rebuilt the missiles piece by piece. Within 5 years, they produced the R-1, a near copy of von Braun's design, and from there advanced toward intercontinental rockets. In the West, von Braun's own group tested high-altitude vehicles at White Sands and later Cape Canaveral. What had begun as a terror weapon became the first step towards space exploration. The world's missile age was not born from peace, but from the debris of conflict. Alongside rockets, aviation itself was transformed. Allied engineers studying the swept wings of captured German jets discovered that the shape delayed the onset of drag at transonic speeds. This single insight allowed aircraft to break the sound barrier. The Bell X-1 that carried Chuck Yeager beyond Mach 1 owed part of its success to aerodynamic data gathered from Luftwaffe prototypes. In that way, the most secret ideas of 1944 became the accepted science of 1947. Yet while real technologies flourished, the shadows around them grew thicker. The sudden leap from propellers to supersonic flight left the public searching for explanations. Newspapers printed stories of mystery disks seen over military bases. Pilots reported luminous orbs following their bombers. During the war, these lights had been called Foo Fighters, unexplained aerial phenomena that darted alongside Allied planes over Europe and the Pacific. Declassified reports show that intelligence officers investigated the sightings seriously, suspecting advanced enemy weapons. None were ever identified. Some may have been atmospheric reflections, others experimental aircraft, still others pure imagination. But the phrase, flying saucer, entered popular language only 2 years after the war's end, fed by lingering curiosity about what Germany or Japan might secretly have built. Inside government circles, the atmosphere was less mystical and more pragmatic. Military planners recognized that secrecy itself had become a strategic asset. Every nation maintained black projects, some for genuine innovation, others as deliberate deception. In this environment, the old wartime habit of compartmentalization deepened. Engineers who once designed winged bombs now worked behind numbered doors, their discoveries hidden even from colleagues down the hall. Out of these silos came technologies that still define modern warfare: radar-absorbing coatings, electronic countermeasures, reconnaissance satellites. All trace their lineage to that fevered race for advantage that began in the 1930s. Meanwhile, fragments of the past continued to surface. In 1952, British divers exploring a fjord near Tromsø discovered the rusted hull of a German U-boat containing experimental hydrogen peroxide engines, prototypes of the so-called Walter propulsion system that could let a submarine sprint underwater at unprecedented speed. The discovery confirmed Allied intelligence reports once thought exaggerated. A decade later, similar engines powered the first generation of true submarines capable of sustained submerged travel, soon replaced by nuclear drives. The wartime experiment had predicted the next era once again. Not all stories ended in proof. In Poland and the Czech borderlands, treasure hunters and amateur historians still search for the remains of the Reese tunnels and the mythical bell. Ground-penetrating radar has found voids and collapsed chambers, but no device, no machinery, nothing that can definitively explain the legend. Yet the persistence of the search reveals something about humanity's relationship with its own inventions. Even when the machines are gone, their mysteries endure. The idea that somewhere, hidden under forest or mountain, a relic of forbidden science might still lie waiting is irresistible. By the early 1960s, the first satellites orbited the Earth, their launches announced with the same language once used for wartime wonder weapons. Each new rocket or aircraft test was cloaked in partial secrecy, the details released only when success was guaranteed. The cycle that began in war had become routine in peace. The same secrecy that once protected nations now protected technology itself. Historians looking back see an unbroken thread. The desperation of total war accelerated discovery, and the institutions built to guard those discoveries never dissolved. Jet propulsion, guided missiles, synthetic fuels, radar, nuclear physics, all had been seeded between 1939 and 1945. The projects that seemed fantastic at the time became ordinary within a generation. Even the strangest proposals, like Habakkuk's ice carrier or Japan's submarine airbase, foreshadowed the modular ships and drone carriers of the modern fleet. Perhaps that is why the era still fascinates. It represents the moment when imagination and necessity collided without restraint. The laboratories of the 1940s proved that ideas could move faster than ethics, that the boundary between defense and destruction could vanish in a blueprint. Each secret weapon was a mirror reflecting both sides of human nature: creativity and fear, ambition and desperation. As declassified documents continue to appear, the old myths are slowly giving way to verified history. Yet even now, some files remain sealed. Whether they hide mere technical details or genuine revelations hardly matters. The myth of hidden knowledge endures because every age wants to believe that somewhere, beyond the limits of its understanding, another invention waits to be discovered. And so the story of World War II's secret weapons is not simply about machines. It is about the moment when the world learned that technology itself could be a battlefield,